Thank you. Today's topic will be on identifying data exchange partners and establishing relationships. First off, at the beginning, we want to remind you or let you know that this meeting is being recorded. And as the NEMSIS TAC usually does, these meetings are usually considered public and shareable. As we go through the conversation today, if there's anything that is said on the call that should be edited out for before it's posted publicly by NEMSIS, just let us know and we'll try to make edits if we need to. But keep in mind that this will be recorded and potentially made publicly available. My name is Josh Legler. I'm a contractor to the NEMSIS Technical Assistance Center, helping out with this project of improving interoperability with EMS and the rest of healthcare. Clay Mann is the principal investigator for the NEMSIS TAC. And let's see, is Clay on? I don't know if I've seen him come in yet.
I am here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, great. Thanks, Clay.
You're welcome.
And we are working with Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise, or IHE USA. And we have Amit Trivedi, John Murky, and Andrea Forquette representing IHE. And they'll be involved in the discussion today as well. All right, so let's, just briefly, the vision, what we're trying to accomplish here is getting EMS connected with the rest of healthcare so that EMS can get patient medical history on patients they're treating, that EMS reports can get to hospitals, that hospital outcomes can get back to EMS. And so NEMSIS has partnered with IHE USA to support the development of standards-based interoperability to make these things happen. Amit, anything you want to add in terms of kind of background foundation here?
Sure. So first off, I want to thank everyone for sharing their time with us today and joining this kickoff of the EMS e-Outcomes Task Force. We started this project last year back in August with NEMSIS as part of our Path to Production. And a number of you have joined us on that journey so far. And so today marks the kickoff of this task force. And really our goal is to help provide an environment for the EMS community to advance interoperability, have opportunities to surface the challenges, have the discussions they need to get clarity to move forward. And through IHE USA and our activities, we're hoping to provide that venue and platform, both in person and virtually, for folks to test, to implement and advance their EMS interoperability activities. So once again, it's a real pleasure working with the NEMSIS team and looking forward to expanding our work and bringing in more folks that we need to move our collective work forward. So thanks again.
Thanks, Amit. So here's an overview of the task force, and then we're going to jump into today's topic. We're going to be meeting, today's the third Thursday of February, but after this, we're going to be meeting the second Thursday of every month for the rest of 2023. We've got a 90-minute time slot scheduled for these meetings, so 11 a.m. to 12:30 Mountain Time. We've got the dates listed there for the rest of the year. We'll use the same Zoom link for all of these calls, so we encourage you to just stick that in your calendar if you want to make sure that you don't miss these task force calls. I've got a list of topics that we're going to try to get through in this task force between now and the end of the year. And you'll see things like, really diving into the technical standards, figuring out things like, well, what actual clinical content should be shared back and forth, and what are the data elements for that? How do the APIs work? Let's get sequences of interactions, even the topic of patient ID and record matching. But we're going to start out with what I consider to be kind of that first question that anyone's going to have if they're fairly new to approaching interoperability, and that is identifying data exchange partners and establishing relationships. So today we're going to try to get into that topic through these points here. So if I was an EMS agency staff and I wanted to start exchanging data with maybe a hospital that I transport patients to, or I wanted to start getting patient histories, my question would be first, where do I go? Like, who is it that I'm actually partnering with to get that information? And it might be my EPCR vendor. Or do I go talk to the hospital and try to get with their IT staff and figure out how we're going to make this connection? Or do I go to a national network? Or does someone else get me connected to that national network? How does that all work? If I'm an EMS EPCR vendor, then before I want to really build any code, I want to first answer that basic question of, if I build this code to be interoperable, to transfer data back and forth with the rest of healthcare, am I going to actually have people as partners at the table? Am I actually going to be able to set up that connection with somebody so that my customer EMS agency can send their data to their local hospital or get patient histories or get patient outcomes? Who is my partner in that? And if I'm, a state HIE, I'm asking the question of, well, how do I know there's hundreds of EMS agencies in my state. How do I get them connected to me? How does that happen? So we're talking about that high level today. And as we do so, we're hoping to get some good information from people on the call today about the national networks like eHealth Exchange, Carequality, Commonwealth, about HIEs that often operate at the state level, options for participating in these networks, whether that's directly by an agency or hospital or through their vendor, or there's an integration partner, and how are these networks funded? Just at a high level, like who bears the cost here and how? So those are the things we're going to try to address today. All right, so with that topic in mind, we have several people that we have invited to share some thoughts, but we don't want to limit it to just the people we've pre-invited to share thoughts here. So we are looking to all of you to be able to contribute here and help us understand the landscape of these, especially these national networks. So at this point, I think what I'd like to do is we're going to kind of run through the people we've invited, but feel free for others to chime in as well. In particular, we've talked to Steve Rotman, who is the COO at Wishen, which is the HIE in Wisconsin. Steve, would you like to take a few minutes at this point to talk about what you've got there and how you're kind of approaching getting these relationships in place with EMS agencies?
Sure, happy to. And thank you, Joshua, and everybody else here. I do have a slide deck that I can share if that's what you'd like me to do. There's a few things I can run through. Is that all right with you guys?
Yeah, Carolyn, could you give him permission to share?
Yes, I can. Okay.
Okay, looks good.
Right? Looks like okay. So I'll start with at the beginning very quickly that we understood that there's opportunity. There's been an evolution in providing access and expanding permitted uses to the HIE for EMS purposes. And I would say that quickly evolved. And now we're trying to keep up with the pace of that evolution. Where it started was from a billing and collection purpose that we understood that EMS were struggling to get hospital face sheets, or the face sheets that they had. They oftentimes were incomplete, and then getting that data in a timely way to meet the billing requirements is something that we could fast track and in some cases automate. So that's how the relationships with EMS began. And then considering how Wishen could present clinical information to the EMS providers in transport or at the site, we've heard anecdotally that's important. What they don't want is additional clicks or additional opportunities to distract them from treating the patient. But the information that we've heard that has been useful is history of overdoses, any diagnoses that might be relevant to the patient treatment, allergies, chronic diseases, comorbidities, et cetera. So that information is presented. We are having conversations primarily today with the Milwaukee Fire Department on how that data could be useful without adding additional burden. That aside, we are sharing data in real time, and the focus of that is to ditch the fax, essentially ditch that slow process in automating the data exchange. So today with Milwaukee Fire and their vendor ImageTrend, Wishin receives the EMS pre-hospital reports or EPCR reports directly from ImageTrend, by way of an HL7 ADT, and then followed by a CCDA using IHE's provide and register protocols. And that typically happens about 3 hours after the transport, because there's a process. We're not privy to that, but that is automating. Nobody has to think about sending those EPCRs to Wishin. They're entered into ImageTrend. They're sent to us in real time when they exist. What we're finding, though, is that demographic accuracy is crucial. It's essential to making sure that hospitals can access those EPCRs without the need to, again, fax something or wait look through a report to see what patients that they need to report on for their state and federal requirements. So Wishin is the mechanism to share EPCRs from EMS to hospitals. I would say it's been successful, however, not wildly successful, due to the fact that the demographics that EMS providers are entering into the EPCR that we receive is not accurate all the time. We are working with Milwaukee Fire to identify opportunities to improve this, such as using Wishin before that information is entered in the EPCR to make sure that it's accurate, that in Wisconsin, that Freighter hospital visit for John Doe is the same demographic information for that they're entering, so that we can match patients. If we can't match patients, then there's a discrepancy and disparity in accessing those EPCRs. What we're working on actively now is the ability to push outcome data from the hospital to Milwaukee Fire using a patient level CCD. So that requires, again, that demographic match is essential. And then that when there's an EPCR available for a visit, that once that visit closes and there's a CCDA available in Epic or Cerner or Meditech, that we can take that CCDA and push it back to the fire department, that they can then subsequently ingest. And that's using the IHE query and retrieve protocols. Again, this is in work. It's in development. We have an ongoing project with ImageTrend. There's some tweaking that's happening right now. But that's where we're at today. future functionality, we will be onboarding Milwaukee Fire EKGs, and the ability to push EPCRs in bulk rather than one by one, where a hospitalist has to, or a trauma nurse that's managing, or an EMS coordinator has to search in Wishen for the existence of an EPCR based on a visit. How we can look at all of the EPCRs available from the previous business day, and then push, again, using Freighter as an example, all EMS transports, push all of those EPCRs that we have on file to them, that then they have a single report that they have to go through. So we're trying to automate the request and fulfillment and that data acquisition burden. And I would just say, finally, unless there's other questions, is we have a master patient index that connects all these patients together. So just hammering again that while this is working pretty well, the demographics have to be accurate so that we can confidently manage that relationship and tie EPCRs and outcome data together so that we can seamlessly move this data.
Thanks, Steve. I have a couple of questions. How much work has needed to be done with the hospital side of things? Have you had to work with hospitals so they implement new stuff that they weren't doing previously?
No. When we looked at pushing the EPCRs, there will be some work, but we're leveraging existing technology and existing subscription services. So the hospitals, they think of Wishen as a co-op. You give data, you get data. So that's been in place in Milwaukee with all of the hospitals there for many years. So all we had to do is train a new category of users to access those EPCRs based on a patient name. So, and that's been helpful. They don't need to know where the encounter happened, who did the transport. It's, what is this patient's name? I search for that, and now I can see within the documents tab the existence of an EPCR from Milwaukee Fire Department.
Great. And on the EMS side, are you, as you try to get this to more agencies in the state, are you envisioning that each of the vendors that are used within Wisconsin would build their ability to do what ImageTrend is building right now with Milwaukee Fire?
That is the goal. It's good to have goals. I think we're in the crawl, walk, run type of phases. We're still in the crawl to walk. We need to get this operating seamlessly and work with the EMS providers to enter data in correctly so that we can do this. So before we take a state approach with the Office of Rural Health and in Wisconsin wards, there's a single shareable instance of ImageTrend, that we get this right and then prove out the use case. There are conversations with other vendors, but again, we're not aiming to bite off more than we could chew at this point.
Okay. And last question I have for you is Wishen connected to other networks, to national networks?
We are connected to the eHealth exchange. Okay. That's it at this point. TEFCA, the 5 or 6 QHINs were just released. We'll see how that plays out with the exchange of information. It would be helpful to understand from this group how national network connectivity related to EMS transports and EPCRs would be useful. We're hearing, from the clinical history that we have broadly with labs and diagnoses and procedures, that might be more valuable. But I really it would be helpful to understand how the exchange of ePCRs from EMS or et cetera would be useful in a eHealth exchange, Carequality, Commonwealth, or TEFCA type of exchange nationally.
Okay, yeah, great. In a few minutes, we're going to give some time to talk about eHealth Exchange in particular. We do have several other people on the call right now who represent health information exchanges. So for those of you from the HIE world, anything that all of you would like to add in terms of how you see these relationships happening to bring EMS into the fold?
And Josh, before we jump in, I wanted to make sure we addressed any last questions for Steve. I think there was one in the chat referencing how long the process was to kind of get started and get going to where you are today. And I thought John Murky had his hand up, but I don't know if you have a question there, John, too.
No, I was applauding. Sorry.
Oh, I was applauding. All right. I was applauding too. I really appreciated Steve.
My home state, I'm proud.
Excellent.
Nice to hear from you, John. The timing, so longer than I'd like with this outcomes data coming through. And that it's a consequence. Wishin has embarked on a vendor transition. So that has really taken a lot of our focus. Milwaukee Fire has been more than patient with waiting through that. And I would say that ImageTrend is also kind of building the infrastructure to meet the data exchange, full data exchange capabilities that Milwaukee Fire is. So there's a shared project. The ingestion of those ePCRs into Wishin, that did not really take a whole lot of time. Relative, it's building an ADT essentially, and then a CCDA exchange. That didn't take all that long. The outcome data back over. We hope that we'll see the finish line here in the next few months.
Great, thanks, Steve. Yeah, others from HIEs. Any thoughts on how you see EMS coming into things?
This is Catherine from the Texas HIE. We have a somewhat different role in Texas. We actually facilitate connection directly from EMS, or our goal is to facilitate connection directly from the EMS vendor or the EMS organization and our hospital. So we really are not going to be in the middle, I guess is the better way to say it. But listening to Steve, I think that that's entirely possible, because what he's saying is they're leveraging national standards now to send an ADT message, and national standards for querying with the CCDA and sending a message. And so I think that we're very excited about doing this. And one of my hospitals is on the call, Susan Bradshaw from Baylor Scott and White, and Christine Reeves from one of our EMS services. So we're here to listen and learn so that we can participate in this project. But we also want to make sure that you know that the state HIE in this case is just a convener and a facilitator of conversation.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Others from state HIEs, I think we have Utah on, and not sure if I caught any others.
Yeah, this is David Balcom. I'm a data engineer with UHIN, Utah Health Information Network. I was on one of the original calls when they started talking about this, kind of chasing down some of the fire profiles and so forth. And I have an interest in the interoperability of EMS data to alleviate the transfer bottleneck inside of hospitals that's caused because of data siloing between these. transporting organizations. Could be Gold Cross and whatever network hospital you're in, some large federally qualified health center, but someone's in a hallway because it's not interoperable, and I'm here to work on that.
Okay, great. In your experience so far in Utah, how have the relationships been formed? Is this EMS agencies directly trying to tie into the HIE, or working in partner with their EPCR vendor, or I don't know, how does that look?
As far as the full ecosystem and landscape, I think it's pretty much in the discovery phases where we sit as a health exchange, as far as having a claims clearinghouse and a clinical health information exchange. But I know there's a lot of potential for opportunity, and I'm pretty sure everybody's in some type of discovery, or we should all join it. That's what I'm here to participate in. Okay.
Yeah, great. Well, hopefully the rest of the conversation today helps you with figuring some of that out.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Amit, I'm wondering if we can dive into the national networks at this point, especially with Didi here, to get people familiar with kind of what that landscape looks like.
Well, yeah, that would be great, and really appreciate Dee Davis from the Sequoia Project joining us today. It's actually been a really big week for the Sequoia Project as the RCE, the Recognized Coordinating Entity, and for QHINs, Quality Health Information Networks. There was an announcement this Monday, and the first 6 QHINs were announced, and among those were Epic, No2, Commonwealth, eHealth Exchange, Kanza, and I'm going to forget the 6th.
Health Gorilla.
Health Gorilla. Thank you. Thank you. And a number of those folks are going to be at the upcoming IHE Connectathon, where Didi is helping to run a QHIN related track. And so I know Didi was on earlier. Let me just check. Are you available to chime in a bit about eHealth Exchange and the national networks? I know in the past you've been able to join a number of our sessions, and you led a great one for the NEMSIS leadership team.
Oh, she says I'm on, but delivery at door. Okay.
So, interoperability never stops. So you're always receiving, hopefully you're always receiving info too, not just sending, which is part of the conversation we've been having with folks. So Didi, when she returns, will be digging in a bit more into the national networks. But anyone else want to chime in before we transition to that, from either from the HIE standpoint or any other comments or questions?
Yeah, or do we have anyone on the call from the other entities that were recognized as to go forward as QHINs, from No2, Health Gorilla, Commonwealth, Epic?
Like I said, I know it's a busy week for all of them after that announcement. And so that said, we've had pretty strong engagement from both Epic, No2, and eHealth Exchange throughout this whole project. And so folks who participated in the previous Connectathon works or the developer sessions we had an ability to start working on things like querying the Epic instance for medical summaries and so forth. And those are the types of activities we'd like to also make available with more regularity for the EMS community.
Well, perhaps what we could do is move to the EMS software vendors, and then when Didi gets back, come back around to her.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm back now.
Okay, well, good timing. We will not
I
move on
am
yet.
so sorry. Yeah, you guys started asking for me, and I had the doorbell ringing and a delivery and all these other things. It's like, oh no, I can't be in two places at once. So, all right. So, and again, I was listening to a doorbell and walking through as you were talking. So I don't know that I heard the entire what you want me to cover. I know Amit kind of highlighted some of the questions that you might have. I know they're really around the eHealth Exchange as a network. How is it different from Carequality as a network of networks? And potentially, as some of you may have heard, TEFCA and the announcement that we made on Monday, where does that play? Is that what I am being asked to kind of cover, or was there something I might have missed?
Yep, that would be great. And then from the EMS perspective, how does it look to get tied into these networks? Yeah, like gotcha. How do they make that happen? Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's and I do have, you know, a slide or two that could help if you wanted me to. I don't want to take too much time, so I'm going to talk it through. But if I need to bring up a slide, I can always do that. So just in the kind of a high level summary. So the eHealth Exchange is the oldest and largest network in the United States. It started out as the nationwide health information network under ONC. The Sequoia project was the home for it until 2018, and we incubated it. We got it from ONC as 23 gateways, and now it has over 330. It does connect to 4 federal agencies, 75% of the U.S. hospitals, and the eHealth Exchange network is pretty, pretty well defined in its process. There is a fee, an annual fee. So the way the eHealth Exchange network operates annually, whether it's an HIE, and there are 61 health information exchanges that are on the eHealth Exchange network, using them as an example, based on their revenue, they pay a fee yearly. And the fees range from $7,000 to $41,000. So the most anybody pays is $41,000. And that's, again, for a really large organization like a Kaiser or something like that, potentially. So the fees, and I'll put in chat here in just a few minutes once I finish talking, the links to where the pricing is. All that's publicly available on ehealthexchange.org. And the pricing that I'll put the link to in just a few minutes, there's one around what they call participants, which could be a hospital system, could be a health information exchange. It could be an organization. I heard like Health Gorilla. They're a member on the eHealth Exchange, and they've brought over a lot of their connected partners, their stakeholders that they have front-ending their gateway. There's other organizations such as that have done the same thing. So depending upon how you would interact with a query-based exchange. So this is using CDA documents, and it's a query response type of process. It could be a partner that you bring in, your vendor, or it could be something that you already have within your organization. You already have a gateway with somebody like a Health Catalyst or an Orion or Zen Consulting or one Health Gorilla or No2. No2 has done this quite broadly on Carequality. They have not implemented this on eHealth Exchange, but the eHealth Exchange network is one of 35 networks that are live and in production on Carequality. So eHealth Exchange is one network. Everybody plays by the same rules of the road. They all join one network. And what eHealth Exchange brings you is what I call a hub and spoke model. They have an intersystems gateway that connects all 330. So you don't have to create 330 point-to-points. You connect once to eHealth Exchange, and they, through their hub, connect to all the other gateways across the United States. They do have footprints in all 50 of the states, as well as some of the territories like Puerto Rico and so forth. Being an implementer on Carequality, they also can connect through to the other networks like Commonwealth, like SureScripts, like Epic Care Everywhere, like Athena Health, like eClinicalWorks, like all these other networks that may or may not be as important for EMS, because you're really looking more for the inpatient hospital setting. But No2 is an example, not to try to give them favoritism or anything, but I do know that they work with a lot of EMS vendors, and they actually have live exchange happening between EMS and hospitals on the Carequality network of networks. Now, there is no fee for a hospital to join Carequality or a health system. The way Carequality's model is, their implementers pay those fees. So, for instance, Epic, if a hospital is an Epic Care Everywhere customer, Epic pays a fee on behalf of all their 300 plus customers. There are no fees that are paid by the individual organizations. But if for some reason, let's say NEMSIS, I'm just using this as an example, you want a front end and you want to join Carequality on behalf of all of stakeholders that you may want to do this on behalf of, that could be an option. Now, I know based on the conversations I've had in the past, my recommendation would be to work with eHealth Exchange because they really have the bulk of the hospitals already connected. And you would only connect one time to eHealth Exchange, whereas with Carequality, you do have to do point-to-points to all 35 networks to be connected to them. So that's kind of the nuances between what I call one network, the eHealth Exchange, and then the network of networks, which allows that broader connectivity and to other organizations such as No2 and others that do some of the CMS workflow itself. But eHealth Exchange is a conduit to No2 through Carequality, for instance. And then the last thing is TEFCA. So that's kind of the big elephant in the room right now. Think of TEFCA as, and this is Dee Dee's opinion, so I'm not speaking on behalf of ONC or the federal government because we do have a cooperative grant with ONC, but as their partner, what TEFCA is the government endorsed network of networks. So think of Carequality as the public-private industry version of it. And ONC has created TEFCA, which is supposed to broaden the use cases that Carequality has today. So today, Carequality, probably 90-95% of the data that's exchanged is for treatment purposes. ONC really wants to drive more exchange for payment, for operations, for public health, for individual access, like the patient access and so forth. So TEFCA is going to broaden that. And what they've done with TEFCA is it reads very much like the policy framework that eHealth Exchange and Carequality have in place, but it has a higher bar. So, for instance, there is authentication requirements and identity requirements down to the patient level. How do you identity proof people? Details around what's required to be a QHIN, a qualified health information network. The bar is raised much higher than what Carequality has for its implementers today, and it is just starting. So TEFCA is not something that I would recommend looking at right now because as of Monday of this week, 6 QHIN candidates, so they're candidates, they've not been designated yet, have applied and had their application approved to go to the next step. That was our announcement on Monday with ONC. And what's going to happen, the vision there is that ONC is trying to create a utility where all the QHINs, the Qualified Health Information Networks, will all work like a utility where today you buy your cable TV or your cell phone coverage from whoever you choose. They want to create it such that every QHIN has to have the same base functionality to provide to their customers. And a customer could be a hospital or health system. And you could say, I want to do public health transports over on TEFCA, but I want to do treatment and everything else still on Carequality. We do expect that both network of networks will probably coexist for several years as the QHINs roll out. Publicly on Monday, the 6 organizations that actually were approved to go to the next step to begin their onboarding before they're designated did commit that they would like to finish that process within the next year. So that's kind of a high level summary of the different options, and I'll now open it up for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Dee Dee. That's really helpful. Maybe with a first question here, if we're looking at different options for EMS to, let's say, get their patient care report to a hospital, and one option might be that they work directly with the hospital and the hospital's EHR vendor, and it's kind of that point to point.
Yeah.
And then another option is get it into a statewide or a regional HIE and let the HIE broker it out to all the hospitals from all the EMS agencies. And then a third is, let's connect through someone who is connected to eHealth Exchange or another national network. Can you talk a little bit about the differences and how that would look in those three options?
Yeah. So if somebody wants to connect through their hospital, and I'm going to use, Epic or Cerner or, one of those. So on the eHealth Exchange network, we have Epic, we have Cerner, we have 35 different EHR vendors that have different customers connected to eHealth Exchange. What's required to connect to the eHealth Exchange is to do the application, to sign what they call their DURSA, the Data Use and Reciprocal Sharing Agreement, meaning you are all playing by the same rules of the road. If you have a breach, you agree to let everyone know on the network within 24 hours that you've had a breach, for instance, things like that. So they're all policy drivers, but you sign one data sharing agreement and you connect to everyone. So it eliminates the need for business associate agreements. That's the eHealth Exchange. If you're using a vendor like Epic or Cerner, you work with that vendor, the actual entity, the hospital system themselves would be the one that signs that DURSA and the application to onboard to the eHealth Exchange network. So that's the avenue that would happen. So whether you have your own vendor on the hospital side, if it's an EMS vendor, and I apologize, I know there's about 3 or 4 that are the primary EMS vendors out there that have technology in place. And I can't remember for the life of me who they are right now. But if you wanted to go down the route of connecting through one of those organizations, they would need to either onboard on behalf of all their stakeholders, meaning like a Health Gorilla does today. They have multiple organizations underneath them that connect to the eHealth Exchange. And they pay the fee. And there is no fee that's transferred downstream to maybe EMS, if that's something that's required. There's also the possibility, and I talked to Jay Nakashima, who's the executive director for eHealth Exchange, where if your technology stack that you have, whether it's an EHR vendor or if it is something that you're building on your own, it could be something that their hub augments. So today, I know that there has been some discussion around the CMS work that you may want to do this with FHIR rather than building the SOAP Web Services stack. If that is of interest, he would be willing, and he apologizes, he couldn't make the call today. He's actually on PTO today after his travel this week, earlier for the whole QHIN stuff. But he would entertain the possibility of even working with being able to do transforms. So it could be that data comes in from EMS side of things using FHIR, and then it's translated into CDA-based documents, which is what the hospitals use today. On the eHealth Exchange today, the FHIR use case, nobody's exchanging data using FHIR for treatment back and forth, but there are some pilots that have gone into production with the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to do biologic this is one of their best projects, which is around biologics and COVID reporting and so forth, where data comes from either an HIE or a hospital system and is transformed into FHIR resources and sent on to the FDA. So there are possibilities of doing some of that with eHealth Exchange. They have a hub so they can augment some of that functionality. On the Carequality side of things, it's something where that network, whoever that network is, would have to do it on behalf of all of their customers, like an Epic does today. Now, Epic is on eHealth Exchange, and Epic is also on Carequality. So there are some overlaps there. And the reason they choose to do that is because they want to connect to the federal partners. So for instance, on the eHealth Exchange network, they are the only network that actually has connectivity to federal partners today. But they also have connectivity to public health for electronic case reporting and things like that. So they've kind of added value-added use cases to their workflows. I think that covers two of them. The third one, I'm missing it. I'm sorry. What was the third one that I didn't cover yet?
I think if an agency were to connect through an HIE.
Gotcha. So if an agency connects through an HIE, that would really be, the eHealth Exchange or Carequality does not care about what's done in that last mile, as we call it. So if an agency connects through an HIE, if the HIE is connected to Carequality or eHealth Exchange, you use them as your gateway. They would have to meet the technical requirements, but like I said, for instance, the eHealth Exchange already has 61 of those regional and state HIEs connected. So connecting through one of those, like Wishen, I saw their presentation earlier. Wishen is live on the eHealth Exchange today. So if they want to connect through that, that's just a value add. The HIE is already connected, so there would be no added cost. There would just be the flow down requirements. So like on the eHealth Exchange, the DURSA, the Data Use and Reciprocal Sharing Agreement, there are some flow down requirements that say, okay, this agency, if you have a breach, you also have to alert the HIE, and the HIE has to alert the network that there was a breach. So there's some flow down things like that that has to be achieved. But other than that, there's no cost involved if you come through the HIE part.
Great, thanks. I'll open it up for other questions that Dee Dee might be able to answer.
Folks may be processing, because Dee Dee, that was awesome. I think there are very few places you can get that direct info all about the state of the art and national networks in the short amount of time that you just delivered it. So thank you.
No problem at all.
Dee Dee, I have a follow-up question on the HIE piece. So you said that if you connect to a vendor that is connected to that network, that the price of that does not carry down to the individual users of that system.
Nope.
Does that also carry over to if an HIE were to be a part of that network? Then would that follow the same pattern as with the vendor side?
Yeah. So on the eHealth Exchange, if an HIE is already connected, and I'm picking on Wishen because I know they're on the phone here, they've already paid their fee annually. So there is no additional cost. The only potential cost, so just to be fully transparent, is if they set up as a separate node. Like let's say Wishen decides to say, okay, I'm setting up a whole nother technology stack to do this with, but it's a node under my HIE. There could be an additional fee there, but I don't think that would be what a traditional health information exchange would do in most cases, because they probably want everything to run through their gateway. But we do have some that do have some nodes in place. So that is very possible, and I know there is some, like in Michigan, they have a node, which is Great Lakes and some of those. So there are some cases where there are some business units that are separated, but there should not be any flow down costs unless there's some sort of additional technology that has to have another connection. So the way that eHealth Exchange kind of decides whether there's a fee involved is if there's another certificate needed. So there is a certificate that eHealth Exchange issues to encrypt all the data. The certificates are issued, and those have to be installed on the gateway to do the end-to-end TLS encryption, which uses the IHE protocols. And there's a directory entry. If there needs to be another subdirectory entry and another certificate issued, that's when there's an additional fee. Does that help? answer that question?
Yep.
Can I ask a question on that, Dee Dee?
Sure.
It's Jonathan Fight, Beyond Lucid Technologies.
Hi,
Hey, Dee Dee. So just real quick, as you were talking about pricing there, and I think it may be worth elaborating on who sets pricing for what, because you mentioned, for example, the different HEFCA applicants. They have different pricing structures, different services wrapped around the technology. Can you just elaborate on that so that there's a lot of complexity, I think, to some of this, if you can make clear sort of what gets determined at what level and why, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So talking about the TEFCA piece of it, since that's not real yet, I can't really elaborate a whole lot because none of them are live and in production, and they probably won't be for 6 to 9, 10 months at the best case scenario. So, but keeping it kind of in that family, thinking about it from the Carequality perspective, which is live, which is exchanging 350 million plus documents every month. And these are reported by the networks themselves. So billions of transactions, and these are actual patient level documents. These are not just to try to do the patient match, but actual real clinical data exchanged. The value add there. So for instance, I'm going to pick on Commonwealth this time. Commonwealth front ends for Meditech, for Cerner and other vendors, they have a gateway that these other vendors didn't have to create that code to do. They're connected to Commonwealth, and they have value added use cases that they support those connected stakeholders with. So they do, for instance, a lot of their connected stakeholders like Cerner, Meditech, and others, they connect to Commonwealth using FHIR. And they actually then transform that data for them. The eHealth Exchange is another one of the networks. I mentioned the value added use cases that they have, that FDA best reporting, the electronic case reporting to the Association of Public Health Laboratories, APHL. Those are things they add as benefits that you pay one fee and you get this connectivity. Also, the folks that are on the eHealth Exchange network don't have to pay additional fees for Carequality connectivity to connect to all the other networks. That's all part and parcel of their network offering. So that's a value add that they provide as an example. Commonwealth has some specific value adds that they have for subscription, publish and subscribe for event notifications, like your patient has just been discharged from the hospital, things like that they add on. That's up to that network or that health information exchange. That's not dictated by the data sharing agreement. The data sharing agreement and the network connectivity is maintained at the policy level, and what's done in that last mile for any of those value adds, those transforms like the eHealth Exchange does, other networks like Athena Health, they've got over 60,000 physicians that are connected. They're small doc offices that are connected and so forth, and they provide value add to them by allowing them to have some of that information available from within to their workflow and incorporated within the within their needs, and even helping in some cases down to the patient. There's not really patient level data that's exchanged just yet, because a lot of folks are looking to do that using FHIR, but there is some momentum going. I think TEFCA is going to help push that. There's going to be a project-based testing event at the Connectathon in March, where we'll be bringing hopefully prospective QHINs and payers and others to the table to kick the tires on the FHIR IG there. But if you think about the value-added use cases, there's all kinds of potential that these health information exchanges can do to add value. So for instance, imaging exchange. The eHealth Exchange approved a use case to do electronic image exchange using actual DICOM imaging. You may or may not care about that on the EMS world, but that's something that they offer as another type of data that can be exchanged on the network. So those types of things are based on the networks and what they decide is a value add for their customer base. Does that help answer some of that? I know there's so much we can get into, but I don't want to monopolize the whole conversation. I want to make sure that people have a chance to ask questions.
If I may, I don't want to talk out of turn here, as I was asked at some point to talk about some of this stuff here. I think what I want to try to do is, if I can, steer it back to how EMS engages in this, which is so a lot of what you just mentioned, and this is where, besides the fact that Dee Dee, I think that you and your work are fantastic. So it is really about seeing the world through the keyhole that is the ambulance. And there's a lot of what is involved in TEFCA and in interoperability. My organization joined Commonwealth in 2015. We saw a lot of the evolution when FHIR was still conceptual. So there's a lot here. We still have to explain to people in our profession that FHIR is spelled FHIR, not FIRE in this context.
Yep.
It's actually not a joke. Like it's funny, but it's not. There's a lot of work here. So you mentioned things like imaging, which is darn near irrelevant to mobile medicine, except for very specific kinds and very specific use cases. There are other challenges that have been faced by folks trying to engage with health information exchanges or the networks when it comes to the pricing models, because the pricing models don't map onto ambulance services very well. That is an ongoing conversation in the Midwest right now. I'm pissing off all the right people in terms of trying to get them to realize that the pricing model doesn't fit. So I think I want to make sure we bring it back to that, because a lot of what you're describing is the promise of TEFCA. Some of this was actually still educated to me by Dr. Tripathi. We had a group call with ONC at the end of the year when the topic of QHIN for EMS was raised. And that was an interesting discussion with him and Rachel and so on. So there's a lot to be had here. Some of what you described is kind of the macro vision of what these interoperability networks are meant to do. And unfortunately, they are largely irrelevant to the current practice of mobile medicine. FHIR is a way to go. FHIR is a ways away, and it's become very distracting to folks who are still trying to understand how do you identify a John Doe in the field. So I think if we can, but it's also the answer key. Because the answer to getting the outcomes from the hospitals that folks are begging for is FHIR. And as I was mentioning to some folks before the call formally started, one of the biggest problems that this profession has is they can't tell truth from bullshit anymore.
Right.
And so I think to the degree that we can talk about what actually happens and how it works, what those minimums really are, how the differences between a vendor promise and a technical reality, those are real. And I think we need to talk about that. So if we can, I just wanted to throw in that some of what you're describing is visionary, wonderful, but we also need to bring it back to the guy in the truck.
And that's fair enough. And keeping it to that pragmatic guidance, you are absolutely 100% correct. FHIR is not scalable right now for primetime use. And if you think about it from an infrastructure perspective, so FHIR has well-defined content and data in the way of resources. But if you think about all the parts that work into a workflow, you've got to match a patient. You've got to be able to find directory entries. You've got to have intermediaries that translate this data, because today there is not a lot of ubiquitous FHIR to FHIR exchange, and I don't see that happening anytime really soon. In fact, on the TEFCA side, a lot of people are saying, well, why didn't TEFCA just point to FHIR? It's because it's not ready. And we've been trying to say that, and we finally got it across to ONC, because I know that Mickey Tripathi is a very big advocate for FHIR and has been for a long time, and we are trying to push the envelope. But in the real world today, the SOAP web services, the IHE profiles for cross-community access, for the query retrieve of data, and the XCPD, the cross-community patient discovery to match the patient, is what is actually in use. So all the data, probably 95, 98% of the data that's exchanged in the United States today is being exchanged via the SOAP web services from one organization to another, whether it's through Carequality and their networks of networks, or through the eHealth exchange as one of those implementers on the network. That SOAP web services stack is what is actually being used. Now, a lot of folks say that's complex, and a lot of folks say that that's a lot more heavy lifting in the way of development. And I understand that, having actually onboarded 3 organizations to the Health Exchange in a prior life. So I understand the development aspect of that, but that's what the catcher mitt is expecting from the EHRs at this point. And in talking to the multiple electronic health record vendors, which is who you want to connect to be honest, as an EMS organization, you really need to make sure that there's that connectivity, but you want to do it in a standards way. You don't want to do point to points. I do know that even if it's not no2, if there's an organization, Epic has connected to several EMS vendors, I've been told, directly, but they have point-to-point interfaces that have been negotiated and they're not standardized, so that this hospital system with this vendor does it this way for this EMS vendor, but at another hospital system, it may be done a different way. So that's what we're trying to avoid, is we're trying to create one standard, what I would call technical framework that would incorporate the EMS use case. And I think that's what John Murky and Andrea and others have been trying to work toward in socializing what's possible, but also trying to figure out where there needs to be that meeting in the middle. So to your point, that's the reality of the world today. And I think to get data moving within the next several years, that's what everyone needs to focus on, whether they partner with a channel partner like a no2 to do it on their behalf, or if they develop it themselves. Those are the questions to be asked, because you've got to look at the return on investment. But even if you create the SOAP Web Services model, I don't see that as being thrown away, because I'll be honest, and this is just my own prediction, it's kind of like V2 interfaces. If anybody knows the HL7 V2, they're not going away. FHIR's not going to replace those either, because if you've got a lab interface feeding data, you don't want to replace that. If you've got an ADT message already feeding the right data, why would you replace that? So thinking about this from an opportunity of what's already out there that you can leverage to accomplish your goals of actually getting the right information to take care of that patient in transport, but also transferring that information you've gathered to the hospital so they're ready to accommodate that patient once they arrive.
All right. Well, thank you. Great discussion. I want to make sure that we get in a couple additional voices here with the 25 minutes or so that we have left. I want to actually bring it back to Jonathan Fite at Beyond Lucid, and then I want to hear from Image Trend, and I know that we have several other EMS software vendors on the call today that I'd open it up to any of you. Basic question here. For those of you who have done some interoperability between your EMS customers and hospitals or other partners, what did that look like? Who did you partner with? How did you kind of get those relationships in place? So we're not looking really at the technical per se. We're going to get into the technical in a future task force call, but what were the actual relationships? What did you as a vendor need to build? Who did you partner with to actually get that going so that data was flowing? So Jonathan?
Robbie, all right, thanks. So I will try to give you hopefully non-infuriating non-responses. So first of all, I'm going to flip that around a little bit. The last question first, what do we need to build? In our case, again, this is speaking from the experience of Beyond Lucid Technologies, we had to build essentially nothing. Back in 2015, our organization was funded by the California Healthcare Foundation in the context of interoperability to serve community paramedicine, which is a lot of words for folks who are not familiar with mobile medicine and EMS and FHIR today. Let me know if you need me to elaborate that. For all the EMS folks, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So community paramedicine needs interoperability. It needs longitudinal data and patient context. So in order to affect a CP model, we were paid to build a data interchange that would convert NEMSIS to HL7 CCD specifically, CDA more broadly. We opted for the CCD particularly because it's so old. And that may be, again, unintuitive to folks who are not technologists, but when you look at the history of meaningful use, the stages in this country of sort of how interoperability adoption was pushed down at the federal level, the the requirements are essentially cumulative. So in order to be able to achieve meaningful use objectives, you needed to be able to consume and produce certain types of data. And the CCD turned out to be a highly interoperable document with extremely well-defined sharing processes. And when I say well-defined, I mean, if you go to the Meditech website, if you go to the Epic website, there are instructions essentially on how to share data from a CCD to their EHRs and to the HIEs that tend to feed into those. So we essentially built that pipe once. We built the conversion engine, and we didn't need to do it again. The upside of that is that some years later, we detached the pre-hospital pipe, so to speak, from the patient record system, so that we could enable others to use it, because we'd invested in building out this infrastructure. To date, we have done that with 13 different EPCR platforms, including our own. So 12 others, which include all of the major vendors, several of which are on this call. We have automation with organizations such as Health EMS and ESO, which of course, large vendors. We have, again, we actually just did a big demonstration in the Boston area using Zoll data. So again, I think some of the Zoll folks are on here as well. So the idea, and again, I'm going to nod my hat to Josh and to Clay, and I don't know if Eric is here, but I'm going to give you guys a shout out. This is what NEMSIS, in my opinion, was designed for, was to demonstrate interoperability. It should be agnostic to the vendor as long as the standard is met. And so we have not had to build anything. In fact, again, we have these third-party EPCRs. We have provided them and had them consumed to date by Perio, now part of Contexture for Colorado, the Quality Health Network, also in Colorado, the Reliance HIE in Oregon. We were the only ones to do that, which is pretty wild. The Bronx Rio in New York, and Health Gorilla. And so, again, Dee Dee, nod to you for pointing out Health Gorilla. But they have been extremely aggressive about participating in demonstrations and sucking in data as much as we can. We've got a statewide initiative I can't talk to you about yet, but here's hoping that's going to be announced soon. And I mentioned about the discussion that I've been having with ONC about sort of helping EMS to do this because there's too much noise. So the idea of creating or being a QHIN for EMS is very interesting to me, very complicated, but interesting. That said, you asked the question, Josh, of how we have engaged with the different organizations, and even in the ones that I just mentioned, the answer is it kind of depends. And that's, so I don't want to give you a non-answer. The answer is more all of the above. So back in 2015, we joined Commonwealth. We were the first organization from EMS, the EMS mobile medical ecosystem, to do that. We were followed shortly after by ESO and ImageTrend. So we do know that there are other participants who have an interest in being that role. And I do want to share something, by the way. Carolyn, if you can enable me to share a screen. Oh, it looks like I can. That'd be great. I'm going to show something in just a second. Appreciate that. So the idea of engaging through the interchanges or engaging through health information exchange at the state or even regional level. When I say regional, I'm thinking in Colorado where there's 2, in California where there's a whole bunch, or in other cases in Oklahoma, for example, where there's only 1. The engagement is different, and we've been finding that competitive effects can go really, really well. So, for example, in California, where there's multiple HIEs, those HIEs are pretty game to be the guy to start engaging directly with mobile medicine. And so shout out to folks like Manifest Medics and Sac Valley MedShare, who have been extremely interested in how they can receive data and really brought that whole conversation to the table. In Colorado, again, Perio and QHN kind of play against each other a little bit. So to the degree that one could be before the other, but ultimately they're raising all boats. That has been really wonderful. Same thing in New York, where the shiny structure has been conducive to the different HIEs really, HIOs there, really trying to to engage very directly with the partners in their communities. So, Josh, to answer your question, it really has been all of the above. Through Commonwealth, again, shout to Dee Dee, we have worked directly with athenahealth, for example. Athena has always been an outstanding partner. They are one of the most advanced, as most people probably know, one of the most advanced EHRs when it comes to speed and sophistication of technology. So their ability, really from the top down, when Jonathan Bush was running the show, they have always embraced EMS. He wrote about in his book his love for EMS as having been a medic, EMT specifically, in New Orleans. So it was always very important to them. They've engaged in community paramedicine. Epic has been slower, but Epic has been very forward about the fact that they want to participate, and they've mentioned specific hospitals in communications and presentations that they have wanted to participate in, and found that the vendors in the EMS ecosystems in those communities have not been conducive to information sharing. They have been asking to provide custom outputs, and Epic refuses. They basically said they will consume a CDA, and if you're giving them anything else, you can pound sand. And so it really becomes a question of how are you trying to engage with those local groups? If they're saying we want CDAs and you're saying we want to give you a custom output that you're going to have to build, that may be a multi-year project. Again, I think I heard Steve's pain when he says some of this stuff has been going on for a very long time. By contrast, the Reliance HIE in Oregon was able to import health EMS data, so not MetaView data, but health EMS data through our pipe in approximately 72 hours. I gave it to them on a Friday, and by Tuesday, I had confirmation that they had consumed it. Health Gorilla, same process, exactly. Bronx Rio, same process. So the idea of giving these HIOs or the EHRs themselves what they're asking for, essentially listening when the vendor's saying, we're Meditech, give us what we want. Okay, I'll give you what you want. And that seems to be working. I will just say that this, for EMS, for others who have seen my name show up in other places, I'm looking at you, John Murky, and Andrea, Amit, certainly you as well. This same approach, I think, is going to be apropos not only of EPCR, but of Pulsed. And I think if we have those conversations separately, we are doing ourselves a significant disservice. I know, Josh, that we're talking about EPCR today, but they're not different. And that's actually a real problem, right? If we split these conversations so that they're so nuanced that they don't matter, we actually do ourselves a disservice, right? What we should be doing, and I think, again, kudos to Dee Dee for recognizing and for talking the truth about sort of what's real and what's not, is that the EMS workflow is complicated, right? If you are able to look up someone in a health information exchange, and by the way, this is happening right now in states like Arizona, where you have a separate place to go into to look up a Pulsed, you have a problem, right? Because the Pulsed is being queued up in certain contexts. And so if you have a cardiac arrest patient and you can look up their clinical context in one place and their end-of-life medical order in another, you don't have the time, right? Because you've got to be pounding someone's chest. So to the degree that we have to start to converge the workflows around the data and let the workflows dictate how the information needs to flow. And if there's one thing that I would bang this table on for as long as you'll give me to talk about it, it's that. We can't talk about the data in a bubble because it doesn't matter in a bubble. It only matters when it's in the hands of the responders and they have to have access to it the way they need. So to the degree that there are HIEs on this call, that we need to start having a conversation at the national, at the Civitas level, for example, around how do medics in the field, whatever their service level, ground or air, community paramedicine, or BLS, ALS, et cetera, what do they need to do to have out this information in real time so they don't have to wait till they're at a desk after the patient's passed the ED to look up their pulse on a website, because that's not going to work. And so we can start to have that conversation. This can start to advance. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I want to, I'm just watching the clock, sorry, but I want to give some time to Image Trend. Again, the question is the relationships, the connections, you know, as you're looking at helping your customers, your customer agencies connect with the rest of healthcare, who is it that you see yourself partnering with, or that you have been partnering with? You know, who is actually like, who's on the other end of the telephone, I guess, is kind of what we're asking. Where do you need to build those relationships? So image trend, I think we have John or Kashif. Maybe one of you could speak to it.
Hey everybody, my name's Kashif here, Director of Product Management Image Trend. I can try to help answer on behalf of Image Trend here. As first of all, for the interoperability platform that we have in play to connect our EPCR platform, Elite, to hospitals, HIEs, et cetera, is Health Information Hub. As far as who we've worked with to establish the connectivity, and the data exchange there. We've worked with various HIEs across the country. I just want to say a shout out hi to Scott on the call from Mission, and also Mark Branding, I believe, is on the call as well. We work with both of them, Mark in the California area and in Wisconsin, and with Scott Rotman and Mission, it was some of the folks we worked with. We also worked directly with hospitals. There are times where our EMS customers come up to us and say, there are certain hospitals in the area we'd like you to connect with, and we then have direct conversations with the hospitals and trying to connect to their systems to establish the bidirectional data exchange. With HIEs, we've even done a full SAFER acronym establishment, which is out in California, where we did a search to the HIE to allowing querying the HIE and bringing the histories, allergies, and meds out in the field, sending alerts via the HIE to the hospitals, filing the full EPCR via the HIE into the hospital, and getting outcome data back through the reconciled step. And we also have, from a partnership standpoint, we have our interoperability partner, No2, who we are connected with, and they give us the connection into the Carequality network. They help us with the faxing and direct messaging aspects, needs of our customers, and the Carequality network. We are connected for the purposes of treatment and operations. The Carequality treatment query helps our crews out in the field to do a patient search. That is then facilitated, passed on from No2 into Carequality network to help bring back, the patient medical record matches that can be found to download the history, allergies, and meds and make available to crews in the field for purposes of treatment. And from an operations standpoint, we're working with No2 to establish that connection into the Carequality network currently for bringing outcome data back through a query process into the Carequality network in getting the discharge summary CCDs. So those are some of the opportunities, like I said, so working directly with HIEs or hospitals, and or working with No2 and for the national network that we have connection to, the Carequality network. We've had millions of messages funneled through our interoperability platform and over the last year, or 10 plus million last year alone. And we look forward to continue to do whatever we can to help fulfill the needs of our customers and in establishing the bidirectional opportunities and connecting with the hospitals, HIEs, and taking EMS to the rest of the healthcare network. And we really want to thank IHE, NEMSIS, and everybody here who's helping establish these monthly calls. And they've been incredibly helpful. And are helping us learn as well. And if I had to just pick on the last monthly call, things that I personally learned and enjoyed from that call, like, when the fire IG around EMS workflows was being presented by John, and seeing that and having those conversations be there has been incredibly helpful. Learning about the difference from projectathons versus connectathons, what are the differences there? Like, I think Amit's comment from last month's call was very helpful. Like, a fire connectathon is to advance the IHE connectathon is to further the implementation, paraphrasing what he said. And then the projectathons, as John explained, are intended to become more mature and leverage the international specification testings that are done at Connectathon with an intimate group around. I mean, just conversations like this in these monthly calls is just incredibly helpful. And we're enjoying being part of these and learning from them, building the relationships with them, seeing the passion of people who are coming to these monthly calls. And I think from an aspect of building partnerships, relationships, for example, Catherine Lasco, who on the last call expressed her sincere desire on how to increase interoperability in the state of Texas and brought her passion to the call. And just hearing folks like that and seeing the excitement and the connections that are then getting established is beautiful. So I just want to end with that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kashif. I know we have a few other EMS software vendors on the call. I want to make sure that you have a chance to chime in if you've got something to say on this question of kind of how those relationships have looked for interoperability, or maybe what you're hoping to do in the future to, where are those connections going to happen? So any other EMS software vendors that want to chime in on that? Okay, and then I know that we have EMS agencies and we have state public health, state EMS offices on the call today. I want to take about 5 more minutes before we go into our wrap up for the meeting. So from EMS agencies and states, well, I guess let me turn my screen sharing back on, and maybe we'll kind of phrase the question this way. From the discussion that we've had on today's call, have we helped to get some answers for you to some of these questions about the national networks, how an EMS agency or a state system might actually participate, who they're going to be talking to, a little bit about costs, things like that. So states, EMS agencies, anything you'd like to add in, and in particular, give us some feedback on it if we're answering the questions and helping you out. And Amit, maybe you can help me watch the chat too. Let's see. Okay.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah.
If no one else is saying, I will defer to whoever. But since you mentioned the chat, and I just took up a couple, pages of it. I think what John and Murky and I are talking about here warrants some underscore. Again, if we're going to talk about this for real, do you mind if I elaborate for a quick second?
Yeah, in just a sec. Any states or EMS agencies that want to chime in, this is your chance.
Hey, Josh, this is Amber in Colorado.
Yes, Amber.
I know you're waiting on me. No, I don't know how to specifically respond to these questions here. I do think this call is helpful in understanding that there are many different options from at least a state office. I think it gets tricky because you're really just trying to facilitate conversations with the right people sometimes. And, the funding piece is always a huge question, right? Especially as we're trying to talk about the flow of data from hospital EHRs, maybe back into the hands of EMS providers. That's really been kind of the bread and butter of the conversation is our EMS providers want to know, did they do a good job in the field? And getting the hospital data normalized and in a manner that can be ingested back into the NEMSIS standard, I think is what we've all been striving for here. And we've run into so many different barriers along the road here. And so I did pose a question in the chat about the options that we discussed. If any of them are really optimized for more broad analytics, right? Like discrete data elements that are standardized, that we could look at all million records in a state and understand, where can we improve diagnosis or treatment capabilities of our EMS providers by using the actual outcome information from the hospitals and facilities. So I know it's a loaded question and I don't anticipate we'll get to it in the next 6 minutes, but from a state perspective, I think it looks different, right? This idea of interoperability isn't so much just an individualized patient continuity of care conversation. It's much broader in this public health world. So there's me talking without a real question or comment.
That's okay. Thank you. One of the things that impressed me on the announcement that was made this Monday with the QHINs is that under TEFCA, public health is one of the interests that is represented. So that's future, not, those things aren't built yet. But I thought that was really helpful because I know historically in health information exchanges, at least in my experience, getting analytical data where you're looking for one data element across 1 million records was like impossible or maybe not even allowed by the agreement of the HIE, whereas getting a specific document for one patient that's what was allowed. It was the clinical continuity of clinical care rather than public health use. So I'm
Exactly.
excited to see that TEFCA is putting that in as one of the priorities that should actually be supported. I hope we'll see movement there.
Yeah, and that is all in support of the data monetization dollars that are being funneled through the states. And a lot of that is being done using FHIR. So that is definitely one of the objectives that ONC has with TEFCA.
Yeah, and from Wishen's perspective of it, as I put in the chat, parsing those CCDAs is instrumental in getting that discrete data out, and then joining it with data that doesn't exist within CCDAs is where we're aiming. So parsing CCDAs V3 data and joining it with HL7 or other unstructured data is exactly where we're aiming in a US CDI format, and then that can be used for pop health delivery, analytics, dashboards. So that's something that we aim to take a look at, so we can align those EPCRs to one use case in particular is opioid fatalities or the administration of Narcan, and how we can align that and look at other factors.
Great, thanks. Brian, I see you have your hand up. You'll be the last one before we wrap up.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Josh, Steve, Jonathan, Dee Dee as well. We really appreciate the conversations. I represent Valley Ambulance Authority. We're an EMS authority in the state of Pennsylvania. So as an EMS agency, we appreciate the conversation today. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of dedicated people on this call that have a passion. We are one of those agencies that have a passion. But I have to agree with Jonathan. Bring information to the front hand responders. Between critical information and medical information is paramount to our success. Going to two systems to see information is crippling. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on this call. I appreciate each and every one of you putting the dedication that you have done. And I look forward to talking to you guys more throughout the next year.
Thanks, Brian. Well, as always, these meetings are chock full of conversation, and we always have more to say. But I want to give you some parting activities here to be aware of. First, there's an email group for this task force. I think most of you have probably joined that group. If you joined with a personal email address and you'd rather have your work email address in there, just let me know and I'll swap that out. We have a GitHub repository where we will be gradually growing a collection of resources related to interoperability. That's at github.com/IHE/EMS. You'll see some great stuff already, like outlining the workflow and kind of the sequence of data flowing back and forth between EMS, HIE, and a hospital. We want to basically take notes from these calls that we're having and start to develop them into what will become kind of a white paper or guidance document to help people get a leg up on these efforts. So we'll gradually build that out in the GitHub repository. I'll hand it over to Amit in a second to talk about the Connect-a-thon and HIMSS. Our next task force topic on March 9th will be looking into governmental, regulatory, and contractual things. So what are the agreements that need to be signed? What are the regulations in place that you need to be aware of? Things like that to get interoperability in place. Amit, you want to talk about the Connect-a-thon and HIMSS, and then we'll wrap up.
Let me get off double mute real quick. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. And as Josh mentioned, our next activities are going to be at the upcoming IEG North American Connect-a-thon, March 6th through 10th in Austin, Texas. March 7th through 9th, which is that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, is probably an ideal opportunity for folks on this call, if they're interested and haven't already signed up or registered, to participate in a workshop and conference day where we are going to use EMS as one of our big examples to walk through a number of different interoperability exercises and education sessions. We're going to have sessions around NEMSIS and this particular activity around e-outcomes development. ONC is going to be joining us, and we're going to be having a number of other activities around TEFCA mini sessions and more. So you can find information in the link that I've chatted. Our hotel block actually closes tomorrow. So if folks have an opportunity to register, now is the time. And like I said, we're looking forward to being in Austin, Texas this year. And then in April, we'll be in Chicago for the HIMSS Global Conference. And there in the Interoperability Showcase, IHE USA will have a booth where we'll feature NEMSIS, Image Trend, a number of our partners that have been at the Connectathon and working on this project. And we'll also be having a number of EMS related sessions. So keep checking the work group, the Google group, and our communications for the latest on how you can join us there in April.
Thanks everyone for all the participation today. We'll review through all the notes and prep for next month and hope to see you again and love to have the continued help. Thanks again. Hope you have a great day.